So good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 2. We are on page 1191. Discussing the two phrases in the verse "B'Shamayim Mimal V'Al Haaretz Mitachas" that we are arriving to an awareness v'yadaita hayem v'shavesel levavecha, both a cognitive and emotional awareness of the divine unity, of the divine within existence, Haaretz Mitachas, which is divine within the Eir HaGvul, as he puts it, the divine energy that is designated for existence, for energizing existence. And then there's B'Shamayim Mimal, the divine Bligvul, the divine infinite expanse, that is Havaya Lekim, the revelation of a higher level of Havaya Le'ela, as he put it. So he discussed the qualities, the Yisrain, as he called it, the Yisrain, the advantages of the Eir HaBligvul, what it has, what unique awareness it provides that's more than the Eir HaGvul. And briefly, I elaborated yesterday, so I'm not going to elaborate. I'll just say just very briefly that number one, the Eir HaBligvul reflects Atzmus. It's Gili HaAtzmus without any limits. In other words, it's a focusing on the Gili of God, godliness. The Eir HaGvul is focused and directed toward creation, existence. The second point is that the energy itself is defined. Midah v'Gvul has parameters that are going to energize existence, whereas the Eir HaBligvul does not have parameters. The third thing, in the parentheses, he added also that the Eir Pnimi, meaning the Eir HaGvul, the Eir that is immanent, also, even in a state of revelation, it comes after the Tzimtzum and is affected by the Tzimtzum, which of course is connected to the fact that it has measure, because that's its role, is to relate to existence. Okay. Eir HaBligvul, on the other hand, he doesn't talk about his salmus with the Eir HaBligvul, but he does talk about Midah v'Gvul, that it doesn't have that Medida. Then he went furthermore. That not only does the infinite light, the revelation of the infinite light, remember we're talking about V'yadaitayim, revealing it by transforming the Tzimtzum, that's the awareness we come to through our work, that not only is it superior and has an advantage compared to the Eir HaGvul generally, but also the Pnimius of the Kav, the Pnimius Ha'er. Even the Eir Pnimi as it is in its deeper sense, where it is focused on the divine intention in it, not just the mere fact that it's a limited energy. In other words, it's not just the limited energy that's going from the paintbrush into the canvas, into creating the art, but also the artist's intention within that Eir Pnimi, Pnimi Sakav, he says, is also Medida, because Behechlech Shekol Eir Pnimi Ubchinas Medida. Every Eir Pnimi, meaning every dimension of an immanent energy, has an element of measure to it. Excuse me. So now we're going to continue where we left off, and I already mentioned yesterday the next step of this is, but 1 second here. Medida, what does Medida mean? When you say Medida means a measure. You're measuring something. Like he said earlier in the parentheses, that, what was the word expression? Shemedida gufi b'chinas hagbala. You're measuring something. But that can be understood in two ways. When in the human terms, something has measure, then obviously it's finite and has its parameters, which of course is very different than the infinite that doesn't have parameters. But a medida milmaila, that God is making a medida, that's not fundamentally a medida, that's just God choosing to express himself in a particular way. That's what he's now going to qualify. So in that context, how is that not as powerful as Erab Ligvul, where God chooses to express himself in unlimited ways. It's two different forms of expression. So he's going to introduce something we already learned in volume 1. This is a very critical chapter. I don't know if you may some of you may remember, where he spoke about the medida of mitzvahs, of Torah. Is the medida of mitzvahs, the measure of mitzvahs? We know mitzvahs have structure. Is that a medida, what we're going to call a medida b'poel, an actual measure, or is what we're going to call a medida atzmis? In other words, it's only a medida because God wants it to have that form, but it doesn't fundamentally, it would not fall into the category necessarily of a gvul. So that's what he's going to address now. We'll explain it as I go along, but let's read it inside. So on page 1191, you can find these pages if you need to online at ayinbeis.com. And we are on line that begins Chulu, Shezeh Behechrech. So 3, 6, 7 lines from the top. So after saying that, that we have to say that every immanent energy, Hu B'Bchinas Medida, is in a state of measure. V'agam de Medida Zeisi Medida Atzmis. And even though this Medida, in other words, God's choosing to create a kav, which is a narrow flow of consciousness, like the teacher that's now taken all his brilliance, concealed it, but is giving a stream of consciousness to a student. This is called a medida atzmis. What's a medida atzmis? Medida atzmis is something that only God, of course, has, that's beyond measure and beyond non-measure, and it chooses, it wants to express itself this way. Not because it has to express itself that way. When you talk about a human being, for example, someone will say, can you go 7 days without drinking? No. Can you jump 100 feet up in the air? No, on your own. We have limits. There's fundamental limits that are built in, inherent to existence. The structure of existence has real limits. And if you don't, it's not just you have to abide by them. You have no choice. A person has to breathe to live. I mean, I go on and on, the whole structure of existence. The limits that God creates are medida atzmis. What is a medida atzmis? Is that on an essential level, it's not a medida b'poel, it's a medida that he wants it. Trying to define exactly medida atzmis would mean...
Self-imposed?
No, just the word atzmis, well, superimposed is correct, but the word atzmis, medida atzmis, hagbola atzmis is sometimes an expression. In Samach Vav, he uses the word that hagbola ritzenis. Any hagbola that comes by will is not a true hagbola. Any limitation that comes, that's not imposed, that comes because you want it, is not a true hagbola. Here he's using the word medida atzmis, which means it's a medida atzmis. It's an essential level, but it's not a medida mamish. I have to find the right word for it. I mean, the concept is the way I just described it. Because you have to recall, remember, we're talking about here pre-structure altogether. From the divine point of view, there doesn't have to be a structure. The structure is only because he wants a structure. From our point of view, the structure is a given. It's a given state. We come into a world of structure. No one asked us, and this is what we're about. This is where we are structured creatures in a structured universe.
Could we say voluntary?
Not a medida mamish.
A voluntary hakbala?
I wouldn't call it. I don't know if atzmis. Does he mean atzmis? Maybe that's what he means. Medida atzmis. That means it's within himself. Yes, it is voluntary. But that would be ritzenis. Medida ritzenis. Medida atzmis means that it's a medida due to the etzem of the etzem wants it. That may be the way he's teaching it, medida atzmis. I have the hergish for it. I have the feel for it. I don't have the exact. Listen, let's put it this way. We don't need a literal translation. What we need is to understand the concept. And I think that's been explained. I'm just trying to find the right phrase that I would use to sum it up.
Would you just take us, you froze a little?
Excuse me?
It just froze the last sentence. Can you just repeat it, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't even remember what I just said. Okay, so read again. V'agam de medida zeis medida atzmis. Even though it's a medida atzmis, which means it's not a medida because of definition, but because of the etzem. V'hainu she'ena b'chinas medida mamish. It's not an actual measure. Shari b'chol medida hu b'chinas ha'era atzmi mamish. Because in any given element of the measure, whether it's chokhmah or bina or atzilus or bria or yitzira, so every medida, every possible measure is er atzmi mamish. It's a divine er atzmi that is choosing to be in this state of this parameter. And it's not a state of concealment. That is what the etzem wants to express himself. It's not concealment, as in you have to conceal something because if you don't conceal it, it won't be expressed properly. It's not due to Helam, it's due to, because that's what he wants. We said earlier that the Pnimi goes through a Helam. That's a Helam in order for us to be able to receive it. So from the Makabel's point of view, you can say it's a real Medida, because we are receiving it from the Mashpia in a certain particular way. But from the Mashpia's point of view, in this case, the Creator's point of view, the Medida is simply a way of him expressing himself. So it's not even regarding, it's not in a state of hell. So therefore, why are you saying that the Pnimis Chechenis Hakav, meaning the actual creation of existence, is a divine energy that's measured toward that existence? But if you're talking about from the perspective of the Pnimis Hakav, meaning how God sees that measure is simply an Er Atzmi that is not subject to consume. That's what he wants. Since when is infinite expression more divine than finite expression? Even though I did say earlier, and we're going to speak about this, that the infinite expresses more of Atzmus, not just one aspect, which we'll learn about shortly. But right now he's asking the question from that perspective of the Pnimius Ha'er, Pnimius Hakav, isn't it also just an Er Atzmi? There's like two tracks. Here God wants to express himself without any parameters, and here God wants to express himself with parameters. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to answer this. He said it as a hagam, a qualification. He didn't ask it as a question, but essentially it is a question. It's trying to understand what exactly is the distinction between the gvul and the bli gvul on the source level. Again, we're not talking about the actual. On the actual level, yes, God wants Shabbos not to be the weekdays. That's a medida. That's a true measure. You can't, on Shabbos, you can't say, it's all one thing. But in the Pnimis HaKavana, the fact that it has a certain measure is only another form of Atzmi expressing itself. So here's how he responds now, how he explains it. The Kol Mokim, nevertheless, even though all this is true, it's a Medida Atzmis on an essential level, not a Medida Mamish, not an actual defined state. It's a Kol Mokim, Liyese b'chinas er pnimi. Nevertheless, being that this is what God wants it to be, an er pnimi, an imminent er pnimi means an energy that enters into something. That means it's engaging with and relating to whatever it is energizing, not like the er makiv, the er bli gvul. Harihu b'chinas medida. Nevertheless, it's still in the form of medida, and measure. So what's his question? What's his answer? He didn't answer the question. But seemingly. So if you think about it, what he's saying is that it's true. It's not a medida like the limits that we have from our perspective. But to say that it doesn't have a limit is not correct, because God did want to express himself in this way. So it's true. The medida really is higher than medida. In other words, the measure itself is essentially a place that's higher than measure. But it is a measure that he wants. So you can't just say it's like bli gvul. It isn't bli gvul, because he doesn't want it to bli gvul. It's not a limit. It's not a flaw. It's not due to concealment. It's not due to any shortcoming. In a human being, you could say you can only throw a stone 500 feet or 100 feet or whatever it is. That's a fundamental limit. You can never throw more than that, even when you condition yourself you can exert yourself a little more. We have limits that we cannot go beyond. By God, you can't say that. But you could say this, when he wants something to be limited, it is that itself, the will to want that has a certain element of medida. And in Bligvul, he doesn't want it to be limited. That's what he's saying, basically. So in other words, the medida atzmis doesn't change the fact. It only changes one thing, that it's voluntary and that it's not imposed. Meaning, in other words, it's not something that has to be that way, and it's what he wants, just as he wants Bligvul. But it's still a medida because that's exactly what he wants. But let's continue. I think it'll be clearer when he contrasts it with Bligvul, with infinite. So let's see what he's going to say now. Va'ein sof, who built in medida legamri. But Ein Sof in its pure form, not when there's a will that wants it to be measured. In other words, when Hashem says, I want you to write a Sefer Torah, particularly in this fashion. I want you to put on tefillin in this way. 7 days of Pesach, 8 days of Pesach, I want you to eat matzah. Only in those days is the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah before Pesach and no mitzvah after Pesach. This is God choosing that godliness will be expressed, that his Ratzon Elyon is not just whatever goes, it's particularly through this fashion. So this is called the Medida Atzmis. Why? Because God is not limited to 7, 8 days. He's not limited to anything. But he chose this. But the choice is a real choice. It has true implications. That's what Halacha states. From our point of view, it's actually a real structure in the calendar that this is what we're limited to. But from God's point of view, that's what he wants, the Ratz. But Ein Sof, unfiltered, we shall say, what's the word I want to say? Unrestrained. If it doesn't have this particular desire, Ein Sof on its own, he says, it built in Medida Legamri. Its nature is that it doesn't have measure. Like we discussed earlier, this doesn't mean that God can't choose that it should come into a state of measure and parameters. But on its own, God wanted to give us something that reflects unlimitedness. So even though in the mitzvah, or what we just spoke, the Medida Atzmis and the Er Pnimi, you also are experiencing the divine, but you're experiencing it in a particular way. But God also wanted us to experience godliness without any particulars. And that's the Er B'Bligvul. And the reason for it, I explained, because it is what it creates. We get a greater taste of God. In the mitzvah, or in Er Pnimi, you're getting godliness as it fits and is tailored to that particular structure. And it's absolutely godliness. However, it's not, everything has its particular role. When it comes to, however, the Eira Bligvul, you're getting a taste of godliness on God's terms. That's not defined by the structures of existence, or by any structures for that matter. That he says, the Ein Sof, who built the Medida Legamri.
Rabbi Jacobson, are they both an Or Atzmi?
Excuse me?
Are they both an Or Atzmi?
Define Atzmi.
We said Medida Atzmitz, he self-limits, here he self-unlimits. Is there a difference?
Yeah, one is in a particular structure and one is without structure.
Because he chooses one way or the other. That seems to be the difference.
But the bottom line is, but he chose Medida. That's a true choice. It's not an illusion.
But the other way is also a true choice.
Fine, so be it. But that second one is more than choice. The Medida needs a special command and instruction that it shouldn't just go boundlessly. In other words, the natural expression of the divine would be infinite, because it encompasses everything. It doesn't have limits. Then you need a second command, so to speak, a second program that tells the no, now you need, this has to now be measured to fit into a keli. So the measure is a medida atzmis, but it's still a very real definition now. He's giving a definition. So it's true, chachma, bina, das, and so on. When it comes to us, it's complete medida mamish, as we called it. From God's perspective, it's a medida atzmis, but it is a medida. That's the point. It's not an illusion. It's not like when you get to the higher levels, you really see that Shabbos and weekdays are the same thing. That's not what he's saying. They are all the way in the root. That's what he wants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
So it's a
Bligvul
different-
basically is more. Let's put it this way: if a brilliant teacher is going to share, is going to open his mouth and is going to teach, what would most naturally come out from him without any effort? It would be an ongoing flow, a mayan hamizgaber, an overflowing wellspring, and he can go on and on and on. Bligvul. I mean, I'm talking as an example, Bligvul. He needs an additional effort to put the brakes on, to restrain himself and say, no, I'm going to now teach for a half hour and I'm going to talk particular details and then I'm going to stop. So the second, that restraint that I just mentioned is also willing. It's not, he doesn't have to, especially when we're talking about God. With human beings, obviously, we're limited fundamentally, so the mashal is not a complete example. But you need basically two things for restraint. You need the flow, but you need to tell the flow, I want it to be measured. In the first step, in the Rabbi is just, he doesn't need the brakes. Puts the gas on and starts flowing. Hours and hours and hours he can talk and go on and on and on. What will happen, obviously, the Kalim, the Makablim won't be able to receive it all. So obviously, it's not going to work well from a point of view of functionality. But point of view of the teacher, so they're both, in the sense, they're both coming from the teacher. But one he calls Medida, even though it's a Medida Atzmis, and the other he says does not have any limits. So, yes, so if you're talking about from the point of view of God, they're both godly. Yes, correct. But there is a difference. He wants to, of course, explain here how the Bligvul has an advantage over the Gvul, because it's giving us a taste of all of God, not just of God as he's channeling himself into a particular sphere or elam or world or or a parameter or a dimension. I'll
Because
just
there's
give
also-
a halachic example
Okay.
that is brought in Chassidus. We know we have Taryag mitzvahs, of course. And every mitzvah has its hamshacha. We learned earlier, if you remember, that in mitzvahs there's two things, right? The mitzvah pratis, its mitzvah brings the hamshacha of Ratzna Elyon, whether it's tefillin or tzitzis or natilis yadayim or krishma, things we learned, or any mitzvah. Sukkot is not Pesach. Pesach is not Shavuos. Okay. Then we have the general Ratzna Elyon, he said. That all the mitzvahs in general embodies and manifests God's will in this earth. Okay. So we know like this. That when you do a mitzvah, you're supposed to do a mitzvah the way this mitzvah is defined. Certain mitzvahs have a parameter of, let's say, achila of ashir kebeitza. Some is ashir kezayis. Some have different shiurim, different measures. And each mitzvah, you need to know the halachas of that mitzvah. You can't use the parameters of one mitzvah for another mitzvah. And yet, there's the concept of a esek b'mitzvah, pater min mitzvah. If a person is busy with one mitzvah and they can't do another one at the same time, which they're obligated to do, we're not talking about if you could do it 2 different times, then there's no problem. But you're busy with one mitzvah, so as a concept, it absolves you from another mitzvah. So the question immediately is asked, both al pi halacha, nigla, and chassidus, and pnimis hatera. How could that? So you're missing the mitzvah. What do you mean, pater min mitzvah? So you're missing something. Yes, one override. You have to prioritize. You can't do achnosas kala at the same time that you're doing levias mess, for example. They're happening at the same time, which is one example, or other such scenarios. So it's seemingly missing. Says that Agad Shover and Chassidus in its own language, no, because all the mitzvahs are connected to one Ratzon, to the Baal HaRatzon, so the Eibishter is saying that since these are all my mitzvahs, they're all part of one larger Ratzon. Yes, I wanted it in this Seir Prati, but I'm telling you that at times when you can't get it done technically, by doing another mitzvah, it encompasses all the mitzvahs within it. So it's not just potter as, okay, you're absolved and forgiven. In other words, you won't be punished. But you actually are mamshich, the eir, that would have come from the other mitzvah as well through this mitzvah. And yet, the Zohar says, and Chassidus brings, that the Yenuka, the child, felt a sense that Habnuna Saba, who went to escort a kala and couldn't do another mitzvah, he felt berechid the levushaycha, Chassidus, Zohar says, he sensed the smell of his garments that he's missing the garment of the other mitzvah. So how does Chassidus explain it? It says because, yes, you got the hamshacha through the other mitzvah, but you didn't get the actual hamshacha pratis. So you got the ratzon of it, but you didn't refine that aspect. The mitzvah that had to be done, command the ovid le'amnin, wasn't done. It's not like you also did both mitzvahs. You're not missing. It's hamshacha klolis, but the hamshacha pratis is lacking. Why am I using this example? Because you could argue that's what you can say, that you having the eir habligvul in the mitzvah, but you're not having the eir hagvul, that one that God wanted you to do this particular thing. So Rabbi Hamnuna Saba was still lacking something. I'm not talking about halachically. He wasn't responsible and not obligated to even fulfill it, but you can't say that he actually was mamshich. The hamshach is what you'd be mamshich through the second mitzvah that he couldn't do because he was doing another mitzvah. So what do you see from this? That in both cases, the detail is also what God wants. But there's scenarios where you can access the element that they're all connected, but nevertheless, you're lacking that specific thing. Now here, of course, he wants to talk about the quality of the eir habligvul, not the quality of the eir hagvul. But I just wanted to give an example where we're talking about everything here is mitzvahs, God's mitzvahs. Or when you say pikuach nefesh deicha kol haTorah, deicha Shabbos. So we know deicha, the Alter Rebbe says deicha, but it could also be, he uses two expressions. It's k'moy heter, keheter, or keheter mamish. So in some places it says pikuach nefesh is not just deicha. In other words, it doesn't just override. It's a way of actually keeping Shabbos. When you save a life by desecrating Shabbos, it's not desecration, it's sanctifying Shabbos. Why? Because you're going to the deeper level that the ratzon is not really defined by definition. It's not limited to Shabbos. If pikuach nefesh happens to come, then suddenly the mitzvah is not bound by a medida mamish. It's a medida atzmis. But the eir habligvul, on the other hand, doesn't have any of this issue because it's not defined by measure altogether. So I don't know if this helped or not, but there's just a little more elaboration on what a medida atzmis is. You can see the mitzvah, because if it was a medida mamish, you can't just replace it. You can't replace let's say a chicken with a donkey. They're two different entities.
Okay, my question was basically motivated. We had said the Pnimis Akav was the Ayin of the Yeshemiti, and I wondered, how that seems to be what we're talking now. Pnimis Akav. So that seems to be what we're discussing. That the Medida Atzmi.
But it's the Ayin of the Yeshemiti only in comparison to Chetzenis Akav. Compared to the eir habligvul, it would not be called Ayin of the Yeshemiti. Compared to the eir habligvul is Ayin of Yeshemiti. If you look at the different interpretations we learned earlier, Primis Akav compared to Chetzenis Akav is the Ayin of the Yeshemiti. Because the Primis Akavona of God in that particular Primi, as we learned. But if you look at the previous interpretations, he speaks about the eir habligvul being the Ayin of the Yeshemiti.
Right, I know. So this is the first time I had the understanding that there's different levels of the Ayin Yeshemiti, like in this fashion. I mean, we've had 4 levels of the Ayin Yeshemiti for sure, but that was mostly from our perception. But now we're saying in actual quality, there's differences in the Ayin Yeshemiti. That's
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. If you go back to the page I referred to a number of times, what was it? Aleph Kuf Mem Tes, I think.
Whatever. Okay.
The bottom of 1149. He says it explicitly. Yeah.
What did he say?
Anyway, go back there. It's not really negate to the discussion here, so I'm going to move on.
Okay.
But then he talks exactly that there's different levels of ayin. There he says, Kavana Khan, the main focus in Ayin Beis here is in the pnimi. But now we're talking about pnimi in contrast to habligvul. So that changes the whole picture.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Fine. That was a nice clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Now we continue. V'yesh yisrin la'er shebebchinas bligvul ala er shebebchinas gvul midah. I don't know if he's adding something new now or he's explaining what was said so far. So let's read it and we'll figure it out. But basically, we've stated now the difference between era gvul, era bligvul, even on the level of medida atzmis, pnimius hakav, it's still medida because that's what. So fine, it's what God wants, but that's the measure. That's what He wants. And in the era of bligvul, bilti medida klal. And now he's going back to there's a quality, there's an advantage to the to the light that's in the state of bligvul over the light in the state of gvul, even though the gvul is also a gvul amidida atzmis. Keep that in mind. So what's the advantage? So we already discussed it, but let's see what the Rebbe Rashab spells out. So he starts with a parentheses, and then but that's after the parentheses where he really gets into it. So let's read the parentheses, and then you'll see right after the parentheses he says v'hu, and what is this advantage? But I don't want to jump. Let's read the parentheses first. But I'm only mentioning it because it can get a little complex here. So I'll try to navigate this properly with you. So let's go. This advantage of the Eir, which is in the state of bligvul, without parameters, and the Eir that's in a state of parameters, that is defined and structured and toward the structure of existence. He says like this, not only, Leimeboy means not only. What we're discussing now is the advantage of the infinite light is not just compared in relation to the Eir, the energy that radiates toward existence, towards the worlds. That there's an advantage to the Eir HaBligvul that we learned earlier. So in other words, he's going to go further than what we learned earlier. So not only is there an advantage compared to the energy that goes into existence, in two ways there's an advantage that we spoke about earlier. The first thing, remember he said is Gili HaAtzmus on the bottom of 4 lines from the bottom of last page. They didn't believe Gili HaAtzmus because it's reflecting Atzmus. Whereas, in other words, it's focusing on its source as opposed to the Iragvul, which is focusing on the creation. So there we haven't talked about midah v'gvul medida, measure. We're just talking about focus. The Iragvul has only one role. If you remember, we learned at length. It's here to reveal Atzmus. It's the chief of staff. The Iragvul is the head of the department because its focus is on particular function. Yes, it's still divine, and it's completely coming from the source, from Atzmus. But like he said, it's aims at Kamoya Atzmus. The chief of staff doesn't have anything but to express what the king wants. So the Eir HaBligvul's focus is on Atzmus, revealing Atzmus without any distinctions. Doesn't matter what Atzmus it is it wants. Eir HaGvul, on the other hand, its focus is on L'hoyer Esa. That's its role. That's one advantage of the Eir HaBligvul over the Eir HaGvul, which we already learned. It's all a loy meboy. Not only that. That's one thing. The second thing he says, by contrast, the Eir HaGvul, or now he's calling it the Eir that radiates into existence, that is designated to radiate in existence, is only a gili mina etzem, not gili ha etzem. It's a gili from this source, but it's not reflecting all of the source in the sense of like the chief of staff that I just described. Uba al yedei tzimtzum, and it comes through a concealment, like we said in the parentheses. Actually, before the parentheses, I'm sorry. It comes into a tzimtzum. Mashenken be'er sefa bligvul. So you have the two distinctions. One is what it's focused on. Is it just reflecting atzmus, or is it focusing on a particular role, function, which is radiating the worlds? And it's subject to tzimtzum, mashenken be'er sefa bligvul, as we learned also in the bottom there. The second thing, that this comes that comes through a hisalmus. They said in the parentheses the main place where he said it. So that was said already till now. So the Rebbe Rashab is basically summing up what was said, and is now saying not only that, but we're going to speak more than that even. Because what he added now, what was not discussed, primi sa'er primi. Remember, the question was, maybe all that is concerning the outer dimension of the kav and of the immanent energy, that it is focused on existence and it goes through a concealment. But the primi sa'er, what about that? So he's saying now, here's an additional advantage, even what we just said about the two distinctions, but also compared to that the Eira Bligvul has an advantage even legabi the inner dimension of the immanent kav, immanent energy. So the Rebbe Rashab is clearly stating that what he's coming to add now is a new point, the advantage of the infinite light, even compared to the Pnimius Ha'er or Pnimius HaKav. He calls it here Pnimius Ha'er, which he said before was the Pnimius HaKav. So what is this advantage? That's what we're going to now learn. So the parentheses are interesting parentheses, because it's clearly the Rebbe Rashab is qualifying that what we said till now can be applied mostly to the Chassidus, but now we've introduced Pnimius Ha'er. And yes, we said that the Pnimius Ha'er is also a Medida, even though it's a Medida Atzmis, it's still a measure. But what's really the advantage of the Eira Bligvul? Because we can go back and say, yes, okay, the Eira Bligvul is like even though I already gave the answer, to be honest, but the Rebbe Rashab is not going to spell it out. But you could say, at the end of the day, it's Atzmus expressing himself in two different ways. So he says like this: V'hu, what makes the Eira Bligvul and advantageous, the Yisrin, over the Eira Gvul, Pnimius of the Eira Gvul, meaning even as it's a Medida Atzmis, that it's all it is God's wish to express himself in measure. He says, "B'mashem is dama lebchinas ha'atzmos." That the Eira Gvul has an advantage in the fact that it's similar to Atzmos. B'zeh shu b'chinas ein sof u'bli midah. Not similar to Atzmus of the Mitziusim Atzmusei and Yesh Amiti and Mechuyev HaMetzius, but it has a similarity that in the fact that it's unlimited. So if someone were to ask you, is God limited or unlimited? The first answer would be unlimited. Then he chose, like I said before with the example of the teacher, he chose, because Kishem sheyesh lekeche bebilti balgvul, kach lekeche begvul. Just as he has the power of the infinite, he has the power of the finite. But if someone were to say in a very simple level, what is more reflective? What's more similar to Atzmus? You'd say his infinite expansion, not finite expansion. So though he chooses it, but the Eira Bligvul gives us a taste of the infinite element. B'zeh, again, mizdame, l'b'chinas b'zeh, shu b'chinas ein sof, that it's infinite, u'bli midah, and without measure. So in other words, if God had only revealed an Eira Gvul, even though it's a Medida Atzmis, meaning it's not fundamental structure, it's only God wanting to express himself in structure, we wouldn't have in our reality a taste of something that's infinite expansion. we would understand that God is not limited, but we wouldn't have an experience of it. And the Ein Sof Unbelievable gives us an experience, like I spoke the other day about the awe that is elicited from seeing something that is completely infinite. The Ein Gvul gives us an appreciation of God as he relates to us. And it's also not because God is fundamentally defined. But nevertheless, Ein Gvul has this quality that introduces another perspective, that bird's eye view, infinite perspective of the divine experience. So v'yadaita Ayin, v'shamayim emal is not just Oretz Mitachas, gives us a taste and experience, an awareness of the divine within existence. And Shemaim Emal gives us an experience, a taste and experience, and awareness of a divine beyond structure altogether. Okay. The ha'atzmus hu b'chinas ein sof mamish. Because atzmus is mamish ein sof. Atzmus will not be defined ever by any definition. It's ein sof mamish. Va'ein ein sof ha'bligvul. Don't worry, he's going to qualify soon. Is atzmus defined by bligvul? Because we know bligvul is also a definition. So we're going to get there, and we'll discuss it. So don't jump yet. But right now, we do have one element that the bligvul gives us that awareness. The fact that it does not have parameters, and it's ein sof, harihu mizdame ela atzmus. It is similar to this aspect of atzmus, the ein sof of atzmus. So the Ein HaGvul gives us a taste of the gvul of atzmus, meaning the will, the rotzen for gvul, God's will and wish to manifest in a defined way. And the Ein HaBligvul gives us a taste of atzmus, how he is without those restraints, without any measure, without parameters at all.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi?
1 minute.
Okay.
Okay. Before you ask anything, let me just say this. The next section, he's going to qualify this now because he's going to say, but 1 second, there's a major difference between the Ein Sof of Oyer and the Ein Sof of Atzmus. Ein Sof of Atzmus is only because we have no other way of saying, we can't say God is defined, so we say he's undefined. But it's not really limited to Ein Sof. That's yet another definition, whereas the Ein Sof of Oyer, Abligvul, is not quite like that. So he's going to qualify this. That's why I'm saying, if anyone has questions, the picture is not yet finished here. But I'm happy to take any question if it's being addressed afterwards. So I'll point that out. So I'm not going to answer because we're learning it inside. But go ahead. What's your question?
The question is, why does it say similar to Atmos, Misdame? Why isn't it actually Ein Sof?
What do you mean? It is actually Ein Sof, but it's not actually
I know.
Atzmus. Because Oyer is not Atzmus. Oyer is only a reflection. It's when you say, for example, sunlight is similar to the sun in the fact that it's sunlight, but it's not the sun.
Okay, that's the answer.
Yeah.
But Atmos, maybe this is more fundamental, and I'm sorry, but I'll take it offline. But Atmos, and this again, and maybe I just need to go back to the basics of structure. But Atmos is the essence of the Ein Sof. So what is above Atmos? Atmos is the essence.
There's nothing
of
above
Sof.
Atmos. Who said there's something above Atmos? God forbid. We're talking about below.
Right. Okay,
Oyer
but
is
he's
below Atmos. A light of something, the reflection of something is always lower than the thing.
Okay,
But
fair
the
enough. I got it.
reflects the source.
I got it now. Thank you.
I think I missed something here, but we say in Hagbala Atzmis, isn't any Hagbala that comes Milmaila Hagbala Atzmis?
So be it. That's exactly the point. Oyer Pnimi is the essence of Hagbala, and it's coming from the Maila, it's Hagbala Atzmis. I'm not sure what you mean exactly, but yes.
And I'm just, when you say Hagbala Atzmis, is it opposed to what other kind of Hagbala?
I gave a whole discussion to human beings. We have Hagbalas all the time. Our whole existence is Hagbala Mamish, not Hagbala Atzmis.
Yeah, that's mitzad us, but mitzad Hashem, there's
But that's exactly the point. There's Hagbola Mamish, that's our Hagbola, and Lamaila, it's Hagbola Atzmis. That's number one. That's on the most basic level.
No, so any Hagbola that comes in but mitzad Lamaila is Hagbola
But every
Atzmis.
Hagbola that comes Lamaila is called Pnimi. You're just saying different words for the word Pnimi. That's what Pnimi means. The that comes from Lamaila in a Hagbola dik way. Every Hagbola Milmaila comes from the Pnimi, the Kav. The Kav is the root of everything in existence that comes Milmaila. So, correct.
Okay. Would a good mashal for Hagbola Atzmis be focus?
Focus?
Yeah, because a person, the Hagbola is not coming from himself. It's not coming from external. When a person focuses, he's being magbil himself. With any other kind of limitations is external limitations.
You can use that as an example if you wish. Yeah. You can use also an example where a chassid decides to cover himself in a talis and daven 6 hours on Shabbos. He doesn't have to do it, but he chooses to put himself in this state now. It's a confined state. And in many ways, it's bli gvul packaged in a gvul. Whereas there's some people who can't sit for 3 seconds and they're all over the place. But that's only because they are ADD. And they're unable to create that level of focus and concentration. However, there are limits in these examples because at the end of the day, we're still humans. And here we're talking obviously in a very high level. I will say one more thing in response to your question, that though all Pnimi goes in the category of Milmaila, that's coming in a state of Hagbola Atzmis or Medida Atzmis, as he calls it here, there are definitely levels. For example, when we're talking Pnimius Hakav, is very different than when you're talking Chetzenius Hakav. And Chetzenius Hakav can be called a Medida Mamish. It doesn't have to be called a Medida Atzmis. Because there are lower levels of when the Pnimi begins to activate and generate worlds, like Atzilus Bria. You don't say necessarily that the Esther Spheres of Atzilus are Medida Atzmis. You say they're Medida, but you don't say necessarily Medida Atzmis. But that itself is what God wants. So in other words, as creation is created, the structure of creation, which is also coming from God, there's at some stage it does become an actual structure. It's just in the Pnimius Ha'er, because it's God's intention, in the root of it all, it's rooted not in structure, but in God's willingness or wish to focus and to direct his energy in this particular fashion. Just wanted to add that. Okay.
Thank you.
So now he's going to qualify and say and ask further question. Okay, fine. You told me, we've learned that the bli gvul is misdame, has a similarity to its source, the Ein Sof of Atzmus. But here's the problem. V'agam, and though the Masha Atzmus Ein Sof, that what we just said, Atzmus is Ein Sof, unlimited. Harizeh be'efen achar.
Why didn't you tell me yesterday? Why didn't you tell me
Because I didn't
now?
think of it.
Okay. It's pretty inconvenient.
Oh, too bad.
So I would have made it already.
I don't care.
So that which Atzmus is Ein Sof, Harizeh be'efen achar, b'bchinas ha'atzmus, ha'Ein Sof shel ha'era bli gvul. Yes, you just said there's a dimion. They both are unlimited. Not defined, but unlimited. But they're not. But the Ein Sof is very different. The Ein Sof of Atzmus than the Ein Sof of Ur. And he's going to explain why. V'hainu da amitis inyan Ein Sof, amitis inyan Ein Sof, hu shlilas hakol. Ein Sof mitzad atzmus is not that he's infinite. It's actually saying that he negates any form of definition. So in other words, what he's going to say now that there's two ways you can define Ein Sof. One is there's finite and there's infinite. So they're very different, true. But you could also say Ein Sof is not that he's infinite, is that he defies definition. He defies all definitions, even the definition of Ein Sof, of unlimited. Finite and infinite are two sets of numbers in mathematics. But what about a reality that's not bound by mathematics altogether? Infinite is not closer to him than the finite. Infinite and finite speak to each other, meaning they're different and they're infinitely different, but they're both expressions. Ein Sof Amiti, which is of course the Ein Sof of Atzmus, who shlilas hakoil. He defies and negates everything. The Ein Sof shu b'chinas bli gvul har ze gam ken teyar. Ein Sof, that is in a state of bli gvul, of unlimitedness, is also a definition. A teyar, it's a definition. It's infinite light. Shezeh ein shayach b'atzmus. That level of Ein Sof is not shayach b'atzmus. Atzmus you can't define with any teyar. You can't say Atzmus is Ein Sof. You could say he's not Ein Sof, but he's also not Gvul, like he's going to say in a moment. Umasha Atzmus Ein Sof. So then, when we say Atzmus is Ein Sof, what we really mean, Hainu Shlilas Hakel. Going back to that expression, it's negating and defying everything. V'hu Shlilas HaGvul, he's defying and negating Gvul, limit. V'Shlilas HaBli Gvul, and he's negating and defying the expression called infinite, without limit. Shlilas HaChiyuv, he defies and negates the concept of chiyuv, that this is what he is. V'shlilas HaShlili, you also can't say he's not something. In other words, whatever you say is already a definition. Even if you define him by saying he's not something is also a definition. So he says, let's read it again. Shlilas HaGvul, Shlilas HaBli Gvul, Shlilas HaChiyuv, to say God is a chacham, for example. No. You could say he's not a chacham. But even that, he says, Shlilas HaShlila, to say he's not a chacham is also he's not a chacham is also a definition. So in other words, Ein Sof in its true form is just a word that we use to express something that has no definition at all. So that's the case. So what are you telling? How are you telling me that Ein Sof of Ur is Mizdame is similar to Ein Sof of Atzmus? It's a very different meaning. Yes, the Ein Sof of Ur is a very great level, Bli Gvul, but it's a Bli Gvul with a definition. You don't say on Ur that Ur is Shlilas HaBli Gvul. You don't say on Ur is Shlilas HaChiyuv. You say absolutely, it's infinite light. That's its state, and it's not like Ur HaGvul. So Ur HaGvul and Ur HaBli Gvul are actually much more commensurate to each other than they both are to Atzmus, which is neither of them, and can't be defined altogether by any definition. Not even the definition of Bli Gvul and Gvul. You don't even say that God is Bli Gvul and Gvul. That's also a definition. And you don't say he's not neither of the two. So you have to constantly, continuously negate because you're dealing with a state that's completely undefined. Or, as we learned this back a while back when we learned about Bilti Mitzias Nimtza. What do we say? What does that mean? It means a Mitzias Bilti Mitzias Nimtza. In English, simple English, it means an existence, a non-existential existence. What does that mean? It means an existence, but not an existence as we understand existence. Because that would be a definition. So we have to say God exists, but we have to say, but in order to make it clear, we say it does not exist like anything we understand exists. This is a state that is completely beyond Gvul, beyond Bli Gvul, beyond definitions. So right now we have a question on the table. So then how does Ur HaBli Gvul closer to Atzmus, so to speak, closer, not the right word. How would have an advantage over finite energy, even Medida Atzmis, when, not just because it's Medida Atzmis, the infinite is not more similar to true Ein Sof of Atzmus. So, of course, it'd be interesting what's going to be the answer to this, right?
We're able to say that the Bli Gvul is Shlilas a gavul.
but not shlil sabligvul.
Correct. Okay.
Yechezkel, I'm surprised you can even ask a rational question with this such an amazing question on the table. That your Caleb could not be total misbattle by this.
I know.
'cause I
Well,
don't-
this is the Rebbe Rashab. This is the only place you'll find this in Chassidus is the Rebbe Rashab, and places like this is as deep as it goes, as much as we can, I guess, tolerate, contain. Don't worry, Eliezer. You could always have a very hearty breakfast to keep you grounded if needed.
Thank God, or a cup of coffee. Yeah. Wow. I can't wait for the answer. Are we getting the answer today, or do we have to wait till Sunday?
I'm too. I mean,
Wow.
we got to get at least a taste of the answer. Let's see what he says.
You didn't finish. There are 4 more words to the question.
I know. It's not over. The Ein Sof. Okay, so what do we have? V'hainu shlilas hakel.
The Chiyuv HaKol.
The Chiyuv hakel. It defies everything and compels everything. Kein zach und als. What an expression. It's nothing and everything. It's not like anything and it's everything. So in other words, you can't even define it by saying it's not defined, because it encompasses everything and also completely defies everything. The Maimer Vayelach. Actually, this is longer arichas here than there. But there it's the first time that the Rebbe Rashab talks about it. In the Maimer Vayelach, Vayelach Hashem, in Beshalach. Samach Vav. The truth is, I see we're not getting there so fast. I was going to go there. I think you're going to have to peek if you really want to know, because there's just too much more he's going to say further more. So, and v'nizbar gam kein le'il. So it's explained in Samach Vav and also explained also above in the Maimer. Remember the Maimer Vahia Onan, Dibra Mas Vahia Onan V'acheshech V'yoyer? That's a Maimer, a Pesach Maimer. That was referred to in the previous page as well. Yeah. Where he talks about the Tzimtzum, the two effects of the Tzimtzum. So there also he talks about how God is the Shlil, Sakel, and everything.
Which page is this?
The Maimer Vahia Onan?
Yeah. Here he explained it Bariches and Vayihi Onan.
The Vahia Onan is the second Pesach Maimer. I believe, you want the page? I'll give you the page, fine. It's Matzah Zu, then Vahia Onan. It starts on page 934. Tov Tov Kuf Lamed Daled. But I think it's not right there. It's later in the Maimer. If I recall correctly, the whole section there about it. I think it's page 938. If I recall correctly, let me see. I'll compare him. So let's see where. Let me just. I'll stop where I think we can stop.
It's connected to this week's parsha. Ayin Ein Amida.
Well, this is even higher than Arnein Min Amida, just for the record. Well, there's actually a letter from the Rebbe, three ways to explain Arnein Min Amida, and the third way is close to this high level. There's a letter. It's printed in the Hisofis Likutei Sichos, volume 11. A very interesting letter about Arnein Min Amida. How do you explain it? I believe the third Eifin is similar to this. Anyway,
Yeah, you once explained it to us.
yeah, could be. I think I should stop here because the Inyazel Dabkins Pim Seshes by Beis Hofkin Shubkins Medida and Medida. Well, I will give you a preview of the answer if you like. The answer is going to be that this is absolutely true, that Atzmus is beyond Ein Sof 2 and beyond, as we just learned, and all the shlilas you can use to negate anything and everything. And at the same time, he's everything, like he just said. He's going to explain, nevertheless, because we are limited creatures, we need different expressions of Elokus to capture this story. In other words, if we didn't have Oyer altogether, we wouldn't be able to really fully appreciate what Atzmus is. So the Eira Bligvul is going to give us a taste of the Bligvul of Atzmus. The Eira Gvul is going to give us a taste of how Atzmus can manifest in Gvul. And then we come to the conclusion that God is neither of the two, because you see, he can create both. So then we start getting a taste of the divine that's beyond both. That's going to be the ultimate answer. In other words, it's a process of growth. We have to begin through Gvul, because we're Gvul. So we begin first appreciating God on our terms. Then we come to understand God is beyond our terms. Then you come to understand that God is beyond our terms, and is beyond even Bligvul as we understand it. And then you come to understand deeper levels all the way to seeing that it's a combination of everything and beyond everything. That's essentially what he's going to explain. So in other words, yes, he's not saying that the Eir HaGvul, Bligvul, captures all of Atzmus. Absolutely not. It doesn't capture the Atzmus that is beyond Bligvul and the capacity to create Gvul, the Eir HaGvul. That's essentially what he's going to say, which is, of course, beautiful. So then what you have is that the whole Ishtalshalos, essentially, to the highest levels, are essentially pieces of a puzzle. Each piece teaches you something else about God. Then you come to the point and realize it's not the sum of the parts. It's even beyond that. And even beyond that. And then you begin to get a sense of the divine in full glory. And you need all dimensions, because each one teaches you another dimension, and also teaches you that God's not limited by any dimension. That is the most powerful part that I take from it.
So that's a yitzchak of the Bligvul. That's
at the end of the day, in the middle of speaking, let me speak. It's a deep Inyan. Let me say it till the end. So by the end of the day, what happens is not only does every dimension teach you something about God, but it also teaches you that God is not defined by any dimension, which is, of course, you get the bigger picture. Now, this is a process we all have to go through. Everybody's in a different level. This is not going to be mathematical per se. It's going to be where you stand and how you stand. Not everybody can experience everything. Like for some people, they say Gvul is when I sit and eat a matzah and I'm measuring the kazayas to make sure I'm eating all that matzah. That's Eira Gvul. Eira Bligvul is Simchas Torah when I'm dancing. I don't have to figure out how much to dance and how much not to dance, because I don't have to figure out how much kazayas can go into my mouth. So in other words, we can all find different experiences of the divine, either in structure, in beyond structure, and then of course the goal is to get to a place that's beyond, which we'll discuss. But I'd rather learn this on Sunday more slower, a little more patiently, because I don't want to rush through it right now. So right now he basically established that Atzmus is of an Ein Sof that's not like the Ein Sof of Eir. It's beyond it all. And yet at the same time, Eir HaBligvul still has an advantage over Eir HaGvul, but the same is true the other way around, as we'll learn. They both have advantages, and you want everything. We're not sufficing with one thing or another. Yeah, this is, what can I tell you? This is the ultimate picture of the whole thing. And it's interesting that Rebbe Rashab is addressing it here almost at the end of volume 2, the last week. This is a week before he would leave Lubavitch. But in many ways, it's bringing together a lot of Ayin Beis. If you recall my Marim before, you could see there's so many ideas here that we've already touched upon before, but he's bringing it all together. And all this is via Daita Ayin Vashaves Levech. I think you'll never read the pasuk again the same way once you learn this, because you're basically saying that you need Haaretz B'Shamayim Memala, Haaretz Metochas, Havayu Elikim, and we didn't even get to Ein Oid yet, which is yet another story. So that's the summation of it. But we'll learn it. We'll continue. Go ahead. Anybody?
You explain it. I just wanted to know, the bleak wool is just the yesoin is that we could reach from that to the Amiti Soatzmus. You explained it.
Yeah.
Oh.
We'll learn it inside. We're
We'll
going to
see.
learn it inside.
Are you saying,
Somewhere-
Rabbi,
We're doing all this with our fool to get the
I don't know.
to understand a smidgen of belief fool, but it's really all the level we're always on is just plain gavul, and we actually use our gavul to get a smidgen of knowledge of belief.
I don't know.
Why do you say that? Some of
Yeah.
us, you could have a hergish for these levels, and you don't need psychedelics either.
Yeah, but
Rabbi,
there's a big difference between a hergish and
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question?
What's that?
Really
Hold
quick.
on, one at a time. Too much bligvul here. Tzvi, want to say anything else, or you finished your comment?
I'm done.
Okay,
Real
go
quick.
ahead. Next question. What do you
Yeah.
want to say?
So I don't want to jump the gun, but there's a cliffhanger here that I can't almost wait until after Shabbos. And it's sort of like, are we going to get to this or not? So conceptually, because a few of us are at the Madrega where we can connect with, even try to connect with this Atzmus, which is beyond the bleak rule. But that's the question. Is it possible? If you say that the Eibishter, that the Atzmus of Hashem is essentially it's undefinable, then how can you relate to that which cannot be defined? It's a very important question. Can it be done? I know maybe we're going to go through this for the next many pages, but so we can relate to all these manifestations of godliness, which is wonderful, which is what we're all about. But it's a fundamental question: can you ever really know God? And I don't
That's why
know.
we have Shlila.
Well, the answer is very straightforward, and it's not just here. It's the whole Chassidus, and it's the whole 1,190 pages, 91 pages that we've learned already. There's a word called bittul. You can only do it if you empty yourself of your ego and your arrogance and your self-contained and self-absorbed reality. If you stay in your place where you are, you're only going to get what you are capable of achieving through your tools. If you want to climb the ladder, you're going to have to go step by step. You can't jump because this is not an intellectual experience. This is a life experience. This is like love. Love is not something you're going to put on paper. When you love someone, you love them their entirety. Is it all rational? Is it all mathematical equations? There's something that encompasses all of you. So experiencing God is not an intellectual process. You use intellect via daita to some extent to the best of the ability, because the mind is part of the tools that God gave us to experience Him. But you need v'ashavesa levavecha, your heart. You need to work on yourself. So yes, if somebody's sitting and indulging, an example we always like to give, in a very juicy steak, and they're enjoying it too much, I don't think they're exactly going to be experiencing, forget about bligvul. I don't think even eragvul, not just pnimius hakav, not even chetzenius hakav, because they're busy with themselves. So let's be very honest and practical here. You want to climb this ladder, you want to grow to that place, you're going to have to work on yourself. There's no ticket in. You can't sneak into this ballroom. The only way to go in is through real work. Now, we're given also keches. We have
Montez, it's not over yet.
Your class isn't over?
No, soon. Oh.
We're given faculties and keches. We're given a Torah. We're given mitzvahs. We're given a Rebbe. We're given Chassidus. We have plenty of tools, but you can never replace the element of effort that's necessary, the work that's necessary, and it's going to be direct proportion to what we do. There's no question in my mind that Chassidim, or B'chlal, anybody who learned Chassidus properly, and then I mentioned before, wrap themselves in a talis, or concentrate and focus not on themselves, but on God, for hours on end, reached levels that are far beyond what we reach. We haven't done that. You know, there was, I don't want to say names, there was a person who came to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he's learning Chassidus, and he wants to, he also was a talented guy, and he wanted to be world famous. So he said all this to the Frierdiker Rebbe. He wants a bracha for all this. The Frierdiker Rebbe, in his very sharp words, said to him, "Younger man, young man, you haven't begun working on yourself. You want. It's very nice. We all want dessert. We all want the whole thing. You know, the Alter Rebbe, when he said, Mili b'shamayim v'im chalei chafatzti, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elam Haba, I want you. That came with heavy sweat, blood, and tears. That wasn't like, the Alter Rebbe sat down one day on a bench and he's ruminating and looking at the sun and says, hey, I want to see you. You're talking about a person who worked his whole life on every aspect of his very existence. He paid heavy price. Then you could say something like that. They say the story, I think we mentioned a few weeks ago. There was a chassid, the Samach Tzedek. I forgot his name. And he would often sleep on a bench because he wanted to break his body so he should be able to uplegen zich havort in Chassidus. They should be able to absorb Chassidus. So he didn't want his body. So he was not sleeping, he tried not to sleep in a bed, but on a bench. As he got older, he became sick. And he said, on his deathbed, he said, if my sleeping on a bench would cause me to lose one day of my life to put on tefillin, it wasn't worth it. In other words, all the wanting to learn Chassidus, if I'm going to die earlier because I slept on a bench, it wasn't worth it because I can't do the mitzvah. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, it takes someone who slept on a bench 30 years to be able to make such a statement. So I'm not trying to intimidate or in any way overwhelm anybody here. You're going to have to work on it, but there's no way around that. Part of learning Chassidus is trying to get it, but you're not going to get it without real experiential work. It's just not possible because the mind wants to understand things on its terms. You have to empty your mind. You have to empty yourself. You're going to have to allow your experiences that you've never had before enter into you, be able to get to such states. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem said, Moshe, no one greater than Moshe. He saw everything. He spoke to God face to face, the Torah says. And yet when he said, Hareini nos chvedecha, show me your face, God said, no one can see me and live, including Moshe. So the Rebbe explains that it's by not looking that you ultimately see. But what does that mean? It means not looking doesn't mean you close your eyes and you peek through your fingers, It's like the guy that says, Habayreach min hakavod, when someone is running away from honor, the honor pursues him. Someone who's running toward honor, the honor eludes him. So the Rebbe says a number of Fabrengas, he says, running away from honor doesn't mean you're running and looking over your shoulder if it's running after you. Yeah. In other words, you really have to run away from it. You can't fake it. So the more you can empty yourself of those accomplishments, and interesting, even accomplishments of Gedusha, in Perek Tezvav of Tani, even if you learn 100 times during the time of the Gemara, it's still not lo yavodai. You need that 101, the shift in your habit, in your pattern and routine. And a little shift can change everything, by the way. B'chol ma'odcha means ma'od shalcha. You don't have to be on the level of another person. It's a shift that you've gone out of your comfort zone. Every time you go out of your comfort zone, rest assured, another level of Elokus will reveal itself to you. There's not even a question, because that's what it is. But comfort zones are called comfort zones for a reason, I know I was a while back, I remember reading about all the different new developments in Arizona. Over the last 30, 40 years, as America has been aging, so they developed all these different retirement villages. And you got to look at the names. I don't know if there's one called Comfort Zone Arizona, but there's definitely Pleasantville. The names are very interesting. Basically, names that are very appealing for someone who doesn't want to do anything all day. So people who are retiring are going to places like that, And the names are very, very like I'm just trying to think of some of the names. I can't think of it right now, but they're very much like that. Like Serenity, Arizona, so on and so forth. Now, I wish everybody well, and they should have a good retirement and a comfortable life. But let's put it this way: comfort zones are not really conducive for experiencing the undefined. Let's put it that way.
Shkoyach, that was a beautiful
Yeah,
answer.
that's how my wife just said, we have Leisure Village in my son in Camarillo, Leisure Village. Anyway, but never said never to retire anyway.
I was once thinking of writing an article called Comfort Zone USA, So come on, you guys want to share your comfort zones a little? That'll be an interesting Fabringen.
This is a very
Comfort zone USA is learn Chassidus.
Yeah.
well. I'm not comfortable yet because I'm on spilkas with the answer to this question that we're on the table here. But was this
even more spilkas after you hear the answer?
Was this recorded? This part, Rabbi Jacobson?
Yeah, it's all recorded.
That's great. That's very interesting. By the way, you gave me. Go ahead, Rabbi.
You gave you what?
No, you gave me a new hurrah from this class. I think I'm gonna dance while I'm eating my matzah on Pesach. I'll be dancing with Simcha, the infinite, the blue world, and eating the matzah with the shiurim in mind. At the same time, I'm going to be thinking about neither of those things. I'm going to be just thinking about God.
That's good. If you can do that, you'll be in good shape. Absolutely.
I gotta change my wine though, because the wine that I drink is very low alcohol. I need a higher alcohol, 4 cups for that one.
One second. Give me a second. One of the ways, by the way, that we expand our consciousness is that when you're sitting and eating matzah your way, you also accept that someone sitting at your table may not be exactly like you. And you don't have to fit them into your gvul. The fact that we can not just tolerate, but embrace, like, you say, hey, lach ma'anya, the kol dikfin. We welcome everyone, the 4 children, the 5th child. That itself is one of the ways that you break out of your own comforts, especially the ones around all the halachas of Pesach. So by all means, do all your hidurim, but remember, do it in a medida atzmizdik way. It's not about confining you; it's about expanding.
Right.
And look, we all use the word before: focus, laser energy. When someone sits at a piano or another instrument and they're completely focused, they create bli gvul. So gvul does not have to be a contradiction to bli gvul.
Right.
But that itself requires
right to get that beautiful music. When I play piano, I gotta at least I gotta play the right keys. So you need gvul and bli gvul at the same time.
And you need to be in the zone. You need to be in the zone. You really need to focus. You can't just
and not the comfort and not the comfort zone.
Yeah, not the comfort zone. I just wanted to invite anybody. That was amazing, Rabbi. It's an incredible show. I just wanted to say that this Shabbos is my father's second yort site. And the first yort site last year, I was in the hospital with the COVID. So I wasn't able to celebrate. So I'm going to have a kiddush. I'm sponsoring the kiddush and daven at Getzel Shul in Crown Heights. Getzel Shul. So anybody that wants to come over, it's going to be a Groisa kiddush, I think, and at 1 o'clock. And say l'chaim, and we'll try to incorporate bli gvul and gvul and atzmos all at the same time.
Well, the comfort zone part of us wants to know what's on the menu.
Well, I got cholent from David Malka. I think that's all you have to remember. And I have I have tequila for you, Rabbi Jacobson. So if you can come by, that would be beautiful. Give my father the honor that I missed last year.
So let me just conclude the recording here. So we're stopping 2/3 of the way down on page 1191, and we'll continue on Sunday at 10 a.m.